Ahoy! I have been a fan of the Sword and Shield in New World ever since I first tried it out. Back then, the weapon was actually a fair bit different, especially Leaping Strike was way slower, was half the range and didn't have nearly the tracking that it has today. Its upgrade, Cowardly Punishment, also only procced if you hit a target in the back with Leaping Strike, but then would slow them for 8 seconds in return. Nowadays, it's 3. Go figure what that means for empowering Leaping Strike as well. But the ability was extremely difficult to land. At close range, you would often just fly past the enemy when using it, and at long range, you needed extremely high precision to actually hit the attack. So between the final beta and where we are now, Leaping Strike got multiple changes. First the range and speed, then the tracking, I think the tracking was even touched twice, and then the perks were touched as well. And I thought those changes were promising for the sword. Yeah, they did lower the skill floor and skill ceiling of Leaping Strike in particular, but made the whole build more usable. And what I was thinking around the time they made the first changes was that they would do similar things to the rest of the Sword and Shield abilities, because frankly, some of them just felt very bad to use. Since then, we saw a major overhaul to the spear, we saw significant changes to the Great Axe abilities, we saw some changes to the hammer, the hatchet is getting some changes at the moment, so overall most of the melee weapons were looked at to some degree. The rapier is still one that is also in a questionable state, I would say. Blood Tree says hello, but generally speaking, most weapons got a fair few adjustments since then. The Sword and Shield, on the other hand, with the exception of Leaping Strike, pretty much feels the same to use as it felt in the final beta. Sure, there were some changes to particular passives and effects, and especially the item perks that you can get to enhance your abilities got a fair bit stronger, but that happened for all weapons anyways. But the fundamental base abilities are very much untouched. Now, this wouldn't be a problem, and I wouldn't be bringing this up if these abilities didn't have significant issues. If they were fine from the start, then there wouldn't be a problem here. But you may not even be aware of or familiar with the issues, especially if you're not using Sword and Shield, so let me explain with an example. Here you can see a normal heavy attack with a sword. As you can see, if I turn the camera during the attack, then it'll turn my character at least to some degree. There is a cutoff point in the animation where turning your camera won't make a difference anymore, but up until a certain point, turning your camera will change your aim. This is how most abilities in New World work, and some abilities even have been specifically reworked to work that way as well. One of those would be Armor Breaker on the Warhammer. There are some exceptions to that on other weapons as well. For example, Skewer on the spear will not allow you to change direction while turning the camera, but usually those are connected to leaps. Even very heavy hitting abilities, like for example Execute on the Great Axe, still allow you to turn your camera during the animation. Now take a guess for how many sword abilities that is not the case. Leaping Strike got reworked, and if you turn your camera with Leaping Strike, it will in fact turn your character around even somewhat mid-jump, which is interesting. Every other ability on the Sword and Shield locks you in the direction that you're facing the moment you press the button for the ability. This isn't exactly a problem on Defender's Resolve, which used to be Defiant Stance because you're not really aiming at someone, but for the other abilities it is. No other melee weapons hardlocks directions to the same degree as the sword does the moment you use an ability. Shield Bash maybe gets a half pass here because you have to be right in front of your enemy anyways, and sometimes it seems to kind of track, weirdly enough. But that is it. I'm sure every Shield Rush combo user can tell you about the times when they were trying to dash towards an enemy just to rush right past them because they moved a little bit to the side. Of course, this is something that can be compensated for with good prediction, and technically Shield Rush is a bit of a dash as well, so we can let that one slide. But if we're looking at the Swordmaster ability specifically, then it's just a huge question mark. While Reverse Stab moves you a little bit, it's far from a dash. It also doesn't have anything else that would explain why it can't follow targets at least a little bit better in terms of rotation. Yeah, it's a relatively high damage ability that has grit, but so is Execute, and that can turn around until the last second. And the same is true for Whirling Blade. Yeah, it's a mini dash, but it's more of an inconvenience that it has a dash in the first place, and would probably be better if it just locked you in place, and you can't control the direction after pushing the button at all. What this effectively means, especially in regards to Reverse Stab, is that it's set up in a way where the devs basically want you to use Shield Bash first in order to set up Reverse Stab. I can understand wanting to have beneficial combos within certain abilities of your weapon, but I don't think it's a good approach to make an ability's aiming so bad that it basically relies on another ability to be reliably hit. And I don't necessarily think that this was the dev's intention either, but rather that this is an oversight based on the sword just generally not having seen much work since launch. Where I have to give Reverse Stab credit is in that it at least has decent upgrades with the grit and cooldown reduction for other abilities, something that can't be said for the next ability. Hey guys, how about you use Whirling Blade in your PvP build? Well, how about you don't? Please excuse the snark, it's not against anyone trying to make this ability useful somehow and trying to experiment, it's against the ability itself. Now what would give me, someone who plays a lot of damage sword, give such deep resentment towards a damage sword ability? Basically the fact that it's not a damaging ability. 135% weapon damage in a 2 meter radius sounds nice until you consider that you can literally just do 2 light attacks in the same time. And guess which option deals more damage? Even worse, if you're trying to cut down the time by light attack cancelling into a Whirling Blade, it takes as long as 3 light attacks, which means if you spec into it you're also missing out on the extra slow and bonus damage. As far as I'm aware, it also doesn't have any way to get grit, while light attacks can with 300 strength. While sword light attacks are very strong at tracking your target, the tracking on Whirling Blade is pretty much non-existent. Again, it locks you in your forward direction the moment you press the button, and it just forces you in this forward motion which can awkwardly reposition you in PvE, while in PvP it can sometimes just ghost through enemies even though they're right in front of you or right next to you. This ghosting issue also makes Empowering Whirling Blade a relatively weak perk, which, get this, would otherwise result in the ability dealing roughly as much damage as 2 light attacks. While still being significantly worse in a bunch of ways. The only slightly redeeming quality this ability has is a 5% rend on its upgrade, but 5% is really not enough to justify using it. As far as I'm aware, this may actually be the weakest rend from an ability in the entire game. Even in a full DPS PvE build, I'd rather have Shield Rush with its upgrades because that helps your team way more, and also most of the time other weapons are much better if you're actually looking to push rend on targets, and 5% is not gonna shift things massively. The cooldown reducing perk makes the whole thing even more ironic. You can now use an ability that deals less damage than light attacking more often. Congratulations. When it comes to Leaping Strike, I don't have many major complaints because that ability got reworked plenty to feel a lot better, a lot more fluid, a lot more effective. The only thing that I think could be adjusted at this point is the duration of Cowardly Punishment. The previous 8 seconds duration after landing a backstab was definitely too long, but 3 seconds for a single target ability with a relatively long cooldown feels fairly short compared to other abilities with similar effects. Take for example Relentless Rush, which is very similar in design, that has 4 seconds with a 20-second slow and is not single target. I think slightly increasing the duration and reducing the slow in return would be fair, so that people can benefit from empowering Leaping Strike a little bit longer. After all, this is an ability that needs to be confirmed first to even have this effect and can also be blocked, so it's not like it's a free empower. In the Defender's tree, I actually have no complaints about both Shield Bash and Defender's Resolve. Other than Shield Bash being weird with the locked direction as well, I think both of these abilities are good, and it's kind of telling that both of them can actually be used effectively in both PvE and PvP in light and heavy. An accelerating Resolve player with massively reduced damage zooming at a ranged enemy is always a sight to behold. The black sheep here is absolutely Shield Rush. I think this is a good ability, and again, while it has a direction lock, I think it's somewhat okay on this one because it is a dash after all. But what's extremely annoying are the post-animation issues. Currently, if you use Shield Rush without putting any points in the additional perks on it, you can combo it into Shield Bash and it's a true combo that the enemy can't get out of. However, if you put a point into it and you get the first perk, then that is no longer the case because for some reason adding Improved Rush with the weakening effect makes the animation longer. This is particularly frustrating because especially the Intimidating Rush perk with its 30% slow would synergize extremely well with a damage focused sword build through Opportunist. I honestly wouldn't even be mad if AGS decides to nerf this so that under no circumstances Shield Rush is a true combo into Shield Bash and it's just always worth putting the points into it. All I want is some form of consistency for this one. You should never be punished for putting additional beneficial points into an ability. These ability issues, especially ones affecting the Swordmaster tree, also tie into another thing. I've had quite a few people ask me over time if it's possible or effective to run a sword without a shield in order to be able to wear higher armor weight. In concept, this seems like an interesting idea, but it's massively held back by the Swordmaster abilities just not being as good as they should be, with the exception of Leaping Strike. You can get away with reverse stab, but it has significant downsides already, and Whirling Blade is just effectively gimping yourself. And in the process of that, you also lose the additional perks that you would have gotten from your shields and the attribute points, so you may lose capstones, and you may lose perks like Vicious or Keenly Jacked or Keenly Empowered, so your overall damage output also gets reduced in return for getting not exactly great abilities. As of now, the sword is designed in a way where having at least shield bash is almost mandatory. And that brings us to another problem, shield weights and how they affect your overall gear weight. There are various problems with how shield weights and armor ratings currently work in New World, and I've done a bunch of testing that I want to discuss in detail. If you're interested in that, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell to get notified when that video comes out, which should be very, very soon. This topic was originally meant to be part of that video, but I figured it's gonna get way too long if I put both in the same video, so I figured I'm gonna tackle this part first and then the more complex part afterwards. If you're interested in more sword-related info, I broke down the best damage swords in New World in a video that I'll link right here, and I'll also link my recent advanced greatsword guide right here, so you can pick your favorite sword. Thanks for watching, SLOTH, out.